Hey everybody, my name is Chris Remillon and I'm a game warden here in Indiana County. We're going to be talking to you today about marsh birds, specifically the heron family, and how they relate to water quality. With me is Warden Sean Greavy. He's a cadet from Harrisburg and he's going to be doing your program today.
Good morning. Like Warden Reed Miller said, I'm Warden Greavy, a cadet at the Ross Leffler School of Conservation. Today we're going to be talking about marsh birds, specifically herons. Now there are over 60 species worldwide of herons. In Pennsylvania, we're going to be talking about the 4 native species. Here we have the Great Blue Heron. It's the most common one that you'll see. Here we have the green heron, is another common one that you'll see, and then we have 2 more special ones, the black crowned night heron and the yellow crowned night heron. Now they are our threatened and endangered species, so those are some pretty special ones, and we like to take special considerations to protect their habitat, specifically water. So today we're going to be talking about how these species interact and relate to their habitat, specifically with water. So we're going to start by talking about characteristics of the Great Blue Heron, the one that you will most likely and commonly see out in the field. So this one here is a female. The color is a lot more drab than you would see in a male. So some great defining characteristics are this long beak that you'll see here. Here's a skull of one. You'll see a real long beak. And on the inside of the beak has real small, fine, almost serration-like teeth. Another great characteristic are these long legs, almost like stilts. They'll wade and walk through the water. A great characteristic for them to have with their diet, specifically fish, frogs, crayfish, other aquatic species. When they're walking and wading through the water, they like to be high above the water, so it's easier for them to be able to see down into the water. I don't know if you've ever been out at the creek or a pond. When you're walking, it's easy to see all the fish and crayfish and small organisms down in the water when you're more high above it than when you're down low to the ground. Another great characteristic, if you can see on this one, is this black tuft coming off the back of the head or the crest of the head. You'll be able to see that whenever they're walking, wading through the water on like a profile view like this one here. So the males will often be the ones that create the nests. They're the ones that primary goal is to get that nest and build it up to be able to show off to the females and attract them to come in to mate. Now, like we said, these are females here. Whenever they're on the nest, they want to be able to blend in and have great camouflage. So with this green heron here, you can see with me behind it, it stands out pretty well. But if I move to the side and with the background behind me and the tall marsh grasses, it almost begins to disappear. Now when I'm back in front of it, you can see it again. That helps the females blend into their habitat when they're on their nest, sitting on their eggs and protecting their young. So talking about nesting and their mating habits, herons like to nest in colonies, or what we call as rookeries. You won't see them down on the ground in their nests. They'll be up in trees, mainly trees that could be dead, not a lot of leaves on them, big limbs. You'll see multiple birds in these rookeries. Now we're going to talk about more of their feeding habits and how their structures, like their legs and their long beak, help them hunt and get food, like fish, crayfish, snakes, other small invertebrates, and sometimes rodents. So these long legs, like we were saying, raise them up above the water so they can see down into the water better. On this Great Blue Heron, our biggest heron, you'll see the S-curved neck here. Now when they're hunting, they'll be wading, walking around, or they'll just be standing still in the water looking for their prey. They'll have their neck curved like this and their beak ready. Now a common misconception is that herons use their beaks as a spear to get their food. That's not quite the case. They'll use their beak just to grasp it. It's pointed so that it cuts through the water a whole lot easier. So when they're walking through, their neck is coiled, and they'll release and thrust their neck and their beak into the water to grab their food. Now that we've talked about the heron's habitat, their food, what they eat, how they hunt, and how they mate, we're going to specifically talk about the water quality and why these birds like these habitats. Now, with their food being fish, small invertebrates and stuff, the water needs to be of a certain quality. Scientists call herons indicator species. These are species that will indicate or show them the quality of the water. If the water quality is poor, their prey isn't going to be present. The small fish that they like to eat, the small insects and invertebrates that they like to eat won't be present. So if you see a body of water that you aren't seeing these guys there, you're probably going to be thinking in your head, okay, there's probably not good food resources there. The water quality is probably not the best. So when we talk about water quality, what do we mean? We like to talk about contaminants, certain toxins or poisons that end up getting into the water. You've probably talked about at school back in the day with pesticides using DDT. This was a harmful poison that farmers used to put on their plants to protect their plants in agriculture. Well, that same thing that helped their plants grow and keep them protected from insects harmed these birds. So if that was present in the water, you wouldn't see these birds. It would indicate that the water quality would be poor. And the buildup of those toxins and those chemicals and poisons will harm these animals. Now, how do we get those buildup of toxins in these animals? Well, from the food that they eat. There's a term called bioaccumulation. As animals interact in their space and they start to eat and have prey that are smaller, say that prey has one level of a contaminant or poison in it, and you eat 2 of those. Now you have 2 levels of that in your system, and you can see as it goes up the food chain, it starts to accumulate into higher and higher levels, so that whenever the herons eat some of their prey, that prey is eating other smaller fish or insects, invertebrates that'll have smaller levels, and it'll just start to build up and have higher levels as it comes through the food chain. Now that can be a big issue whenever you have more of a predator type bird here that is eating a bunch of different types of fish, crayfish, insects, invertebrates, snakes, sometimes even small rodents. When scientists talk about indicator species, what do they mean? Well, they have 4 factors that they like to think about. The first one being wide distribution, meaning that you can find these herons in small streams or creeks, large ponds or lakes, or anything in between. The next one is that they have a high food chain status, meaning that they're more of a predator than prey. They feed on a lot of smaller species, and that makes them higher up on the food chain. The next one is nest fidelity, meaning that year after year they have successful nests having viable offspring every year. The last one being that they have a low sensitivity to contaminants, meaning that it takes a lot of contaminants to build up to have big impacts on these species. Herons are great because they fit all 4 of those specific factors that scientists look for whenever they're wanting an indicator species for good water quality and good habitat and environment. Now that we know how important water quality is to these beautiful birds, I'd like to talk more about some of the dangers that herons are currently facing and historically have faced. Now, previously we had talked about the agricultural damage that DDT did to these birds, but I also want to talk about market hunting. Back in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, market hunters would be killing these birds just solely based for their feathers to put in hats overseas and in the United States. So market hunting was a big destruction of these populations of these beautiful birds. Now we have state and federal laws that protect these birds from market hunting, specifically our threatened and endangered black crowned night heron and yellow crowned night heron. The most common dangers that these birds face today is habitat loss, specifically development in more coastal areas and marsh areas. If you look at the habitat behind us, this is a regular pond, but it's got some more marshy, high grass areas that these birds like to walk around and hunt in. Now, whenever places like this become developed, those habitats are destroyed. The water quality is diminished, and we know that these birds are indicators of good water quality. So when you have habitat destruction and loss for development, you can then see how that it becomes a real common and big threat to these birds out in the wild. I just want to thank you all for your time today, and best of luck on your exam.